Good afternoon, everybody. People still filtering in from lunch, but we are pretty prompt. So we're going to start this afternoon session, and I'll carry on talking a little bit to allow some latecomers to filter in. But it's very good to have with us this session this afternoon on education, which is going to be moderated by Jamie Arrowsmith, who is Acting Director, Universities UK International. And so I'm going to hand over to Jamie to introduce the panel. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, and colleagues. It's a real privilege to be here today to host this session in such a great location. And thank you for making us all feel very at home with very familiar weather this morning as well. So I'll be the chair and moderator for this session, which is focused on revisiting education. And over the next 90 minutes or so, we'll look at the development of the relationship between Greece and the UK through the lens of cooperation, collaboration, and exchange in education and research. I think we know that education has a unique role to play in helping to foster deeper and stronger bilateral relationships. But this really has to be grounded in mutual understanding and reciprocity as well. And I think it's really important that we're able to both identify and try and address both barriers and opportunities if we're really going to build on what I think is already existing very strong foundations. And I think there are very good reasons for needing to strengthen and deepen our ties between the UK and Greece. As the co-chair of this symposium, Mr. Kostas Mitopoulos mentioned this morning in his opening remarks, the last year has been exceptional in the scale of the geopolitical, the economic, and indeed the ecological challenges that we're all facing. And we've heard sustainability mentioned throughout the session so far. And I think to meet these challenges, it's really important that the bilateral relationship is really at the core of how we work together to try and address some of those things. And so education and research, as I say, they're built around collaboration, cooperation, and exchange. And in a really uncertain world, we really need to be able to think more creatively about our relationships and really look at, with fresh eyes at where are our mutual strengths and what are our ambitions for the future. And I think we need to be able to ask ourselves, where are the new and dynamic opportunities and where do these lie for the future? We aren't starting from nothing, though. We're starting from a particularly strong base, I think. As we've heard already today, there's a really long history of partnership between the UK and Greece, particularly in education, led indeed by the work of the British Council and the Ministry of Education. In the UK, there's a really vibrant Greek diaspora that contributes greatly to the richness and variety and diversity of our culture, but also our cuisine as well, and the food last night was excellent. There are almost 10,000 Greek students that are studying in the UK at the moment. Around about 4,000 of those are at postgraduate level, and around about 150 are on courses around leisure and tourism. So given the conversation this morning, there's possibly more we could do there in terms of the focus. I think here in Greece, we know there's a region of 300,000 alumni from UK institutions. And indeed, there are currently around about 20,000 students here studying on UK programmes through transnational education partnerships. I think that provides a really fantastic platform for the future, but it also does suggest that there's maybe more we can do to ensure that UK students can actually benefit from experiences here in Greece as well. And I think that would be really interesting to come to a little bit later. So we've got the ambition to grow our collaboration, and that has so far been supported by a huge amount of activity. There's a rich programme of work that's already underway. For example, there's been the development of the UK-Greece Strategic Partnership, led by the Ministry of Education and the British Council. There's the creation of the Greek-British Short-Term Scholarship Programme, which was launched in 2021, which is aimed to support postgraduate and doctoral students from Greek universities to spend time in the UK. And of course, there's the development of transnational education, which I've already mentioned. But as I say, the world is changing quite rapidly, so we need to be able to reimagine what our partnerships look like, but also what they can deliver as well, and how best we can learn and support, learn from and support one another to address these challenges. And I think being here in Greece, in a place synonymous with the birth of drama, theatre, the first works of history, poetry, Western philosophical tradition, democratic politics, well, I think that's certainly a good place to start thinking creatively about the future. But if that's not inspiring enough, we have an esteemed panel who's going to help us think through some of these issues. So we're joined by Professor Dame Janet Beer, Vice-Chancellor at the University of Liverpool and International Policy Lead for Universities UK. And as we were discussing on the flight here, quite possibly the holder of the record for the longest continuous member of the UK board, where Professor Dame Janet has served as President, Vice President and been elected representative in a wide variety of roles. We're also joined by Vaso Kindi. Vaso is Professor of Philosophy of Science at the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens in Greece. Professor Kindi is author, editor, co-editor of lots of books and articles on philosophy of science, philosophy of history, philosophy of language and ethics. She's also editor-in-chief of the International Studies in Philosophy of Science journal. And has lots of other things in this bio as well. So I'll skip to the end here. She's also the founding member of the Hellenic Society of the University of University Women and is a member of its board. We also have Dimitri Soteropoulos, who is Professor of Political Science at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the same university. Dimitri is also a Research Associate of the Hellenic Observatory at the London School of Economics, and has studied in Athens, at LSE, and at Yale University. And his publications are on contemporary Greek, Southern European, Balkan politics, and public policy. And finally, we have Kevin Van Kouter. Kevin is Senior Consultant for Higher Education at the British Council. He leads on all of the British Council's work around transnational education and establishing higher education partnerships, and has advised and developed HE strategies for the British Council in over 30 countries. Sadly, we were meant to be joined by a fifth member of the panel as well, but unfortunately, Marta was unable to join us and sends her apologies. So over the next 80 minutes or so, we're going to hear from our panelists in turn. They'll speak for around 8 minutes. We'll then move on to a discussion before opening up to the floor for questions. And then I want to, if we can, wrap it up towards the end with the last 10 minutes and ask the panelists all to think of just one takeaway from this session and one thing that we might be able to do for the future. I think that's quite enough for me, so I'll ask our panelists to deliver their opening remarks. So, Professor Beer, over to you.
Jamie, thank you very much indeed. And yes, indeed, I have been hanging around the place a long time. I remember when I was still quite junior in the profession and turning up to a select committee that was being addressed by Peter Knight, who was the very, very long-serving Vice-Chancellor of Birmingham City University in its previous incarnation as the University of Central England. His opening remarks to the Select Committee were, "I've seen off 16 higher education ministers. I've lost count, I'm afraid. But I had no hand in their coming or their going." So anyway, it's now, I don't need to tell this audience, it's 6 years since the Brexit referendum and over 18 months since the withdrawal agreement was signed between the EU and the UK. And whilst there's still uncertainty in some areas, particularly in relation to Horizon Europe, the commitment of UK universities to collaborate with partners in Europe remains as strong as ever. And today I'm going to share some reflections on how we're navigating new relationships with Europe, including bilateral initiatives such as the Greece-UK programme. And I'm going to draw on perspectives from the sector as well as my own institution, the University of Liverpool. So first, just to talk about student mobility. We're now in the second year of the UK's Turing programme, which has replaced the UK's participation in the Erasmus scheme. And whilst it's been a considerable amount of work, the sector's been adept, as we are, in transitioning to the new programme. And I think and I believe that we have provided continuity for our students who've been able to take advantage of a wide range of opportunities within Europe as well as worldwide. And I think post-COVID, this is appreciated more than ever. So just in terms of some of the differences, the Turing programme prioritises participation for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. We know they are less likely to take advantage of study abroad opportunities, and so this development has been very much welcomed by the sector. Turing also supports short-term mobility, a minimum of 4 weeks, which is also proving very attractive to students, particularly mature students who couldn't think about going away for a semester or a year, but can put arrangements in place for shorter-term mobility. Funding is provided to UK universities to support outward mobility, and funding for incoming students is not provided. So as a consequence, we've had to review and in some instances make changes to our portfolio of exchange agreements. But speaking for the University of Liverpool at least, I'm confident we've been able to protect important exchange relationships in Europe at the same time as widening study abroad opportunities in other destinations. In terms of student recruitment and transnational education, since Brexit, sadly, we've seen a substantial decline in applications from EU students to study in the UK, primarily because of the change in fee status from home to international, as well as access to student loans. But one way in which some universities are seeking to rebuild participation from EU students is through transnational education, and Jamie's already given you the numbers for students here in Greece who are on TNE programs. I'm sure the majority of you know that transnational education refers to education provided to students outside the country of the awarding provider, and this could be through overseas campuses, online programs, or joint degrees with overseas partners. And the numbers of students studying for UK degrees in country far exceeds the numbers studying in the UK. So there are now more than 500,000 students studying with 162 providers, and 40% of the degrees that are on offer are collaborative. So the University of Liverpool is one of the leading UK providers of transnational education. In 2006, we were one of the first institutions to establish a Sino-foreign university in China, Shanjiaotong Liverpool University. And at undergraduate level, students there receive a dual degree and are able to transfer to Liverpool for the final 2 years of their programme. And we receive many talented students from China as a result. And I'm not going to spend time this afternoon, although I think we may get there in the questions, talking about the geopolitics at the moment, and particularly relationships between higher education in the UK and indeed Europe with China. But needless to say that we are working with our European partners in terms of establishing a set of principles on which we undertake collaborative activities, both in education and research. To go back to TNE, Liverpool's one of the leading providers of fully online postgraduate degrees, and we've recently launched a new portfolio which includes master's programs in high demand areas like healthcare leadership, big data, artificial intelligence. And we've got students from over 150 countries, and these are truly global classrooms. We first launched online programs more than 20 years ago in the very early days, and it's allowed us to build substantial expertise, I think, and reputation. Although when I quiz our alums, because mainly the only time they come to Liverpool is for graduation ceremonies, but it doesn't stop them being very dedicated to the university as part of our alumni community. I say to them, this is a crowded marketplace. There are many online education providers. Why Liverpool? And in 80% of cases, there are one of two answers which you could utterly predict. It's the Beatles, or it's the football. So if we taught at Anfield, we'd be overrun. So in Europe, and particularly with Greece, we believe that the opportunities are likely to be strongest for the future in terms of collaborative degree programs, which draw on our combined strengths in teaching and learning, as well as incorporating opportunities for mobility. And the Greece-UK programme is an important step in creating favourable conditions to achieve this, delivering benefits to Greek UK as well as other international students. So in terms of the technology to enhance global engagement, post-pandemic, I think technology has enabled us to think differently about global engagement opportunities for our students. And we want to make this a lasting and positive development. So in circumstances where travel is difficult, we've been able to create more opportunities for students to engage on a fully online basis. And I was really pleased this year that we were able to welcome 74 students from our twin in Ukraine, Sumy State, 74 students to participate virtually in a University of Liverpool summer school. And we had some wonderful feedback. And whilst online can never replace for our young people the experience of visiting another country, I do think we're making significant strides in providing virtual opportunities, which are also highly interactive. In terms of outward mobility, we're starting to use technology to enhance existing programs. So we have a short-term exchange program with the University of Georgia in the US, and post-pandemic, the program has been changed to a hybrid format with virtual activities, mentoring taking place for up to 6 months prior to travel. So maximising the benefit of the actual visit by good preparation virtually. And just briefly on research, as I said at the beginning, whilst we're committed still to achieving full association to Horizon Europe, as is our government, we're still faced with a lot of uncertainty. And it's very important that the UK sector is able to continue to maintain its comprehensive engagement in international research. And I know from the many, many conversations I've had with colleagues across the EU that universities in Europe want to continue to work with the UK as well. European science needs all of us to make it the powerhouse that it has been and will be. The short-term fixes that have been introduced by the government through the emergency fund have been helpful in allowing us to maintain engagement during the continued period of uncertainty. And we are reassured by government that there'll be support for third country participation should discussions around association fail. At an institutional level, it's hard, but we are continuing to try to encourage our researchers to apply to Horizon. And we've actually invested in enhanced support to help our researchers understand the interim and longer term arrangements for UK participation. So just to end, I wanted to reflect on the opportunities that have been provided through the Greece UK programme. I think very positive progress has been made so far. As we continue to navigate the UK's new relationship with Europe, bilateral initiatives like this will become even more important. As a result of the programme, the University of Liverpool has taken the opportunity to bolster its engagement and indeed partnership with the University of Thessaloniki. Building on informal researcher-to-researcher links, we've discussed and agreed a new partnership agreement including research collaboration as well as staff and student exchange. Initially, our focus will be on archaeology and heritage, but colleagues in our Department of Geography are also keen to capitalise on the new relationship in the future. And as two port cities, we can see lots of opportunities to build on our complementary areas of strength. So in summary, we're committed to working with European partners. The Greece UK programme demonstrates how much we can achieve through bilateral arrangements, and the past few years have demonstrated how, as higher education institutions, we are resilient and creative in finding ways to connect and collaborate for the benefit of our students, as well as working together to solve some of the greatest global challenges that we face, from climate and net zero through to preparedness for future pandemics. And we know that partnerships are essential for maintaining connectivity. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it's been useful to set out some of the challenges that we are facing as institutions and where there may be opportunities to increase cooperation, particularly here with our Greek partners. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you, Janet, and some really interesting points there. And I think particularly around the kind of the digital approaches, and are there lessons from the pandemic, for example, that can help us actually build collaborations in the future, also with the UK being out of the European Union as well. So we can maybe pick those points up a little later. Next, can I turn to Professor Kindy, please? Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, first of all, for the invitation to this very interesting gathering. I have learned a lot so far, and more to come. So I have not studied myself in the UK, but I have many friends, colleagues, and students who have done so for so many years. They go to Britain to study because their parents and grandparents have done so, because they know the language, and because they admire British universities. They also look forward to career opportunities that Britain has to offer, as its economy is so large and so globally connected. Also, its universities are not only attuned to developments in the business world and the labor market, but also contribute to those developments. The academic environment for an academic career is also more welcoming in the UK than in Greece, as there are many more institutions of higher education and great mobility among the members of staff. What is more, the whole process is more open than in Greece, more meritocratic, less based on favoritism. One other thing that is appealing to some of the Greek students who emigrate to the UK is the 3-year bachelor's degrees in comparison to 4- and 5-year programs in Greece. They expect to graduate early and embark upon their professional work either in research, the academy, or the market. In Greece, the 3-year programs have been demonized for political reasons. For instance, opposition to the Bologna process, to what was taken as neoliberal directives from the EU, etc. The argument given is that 3-year programs will devalue or cheapen higher education. The real reason is that curricula in higher education in Greece are not built based on what the particular subject matter requires, what the discipline or the profession demands, but rather on the wishes basically of the faculty. And so the result is that students often need to take unnecessary courses to graduate, so their professors fulfill their wishes and their teaching obligations. Things have changed, I think, significantly since Brexit, as it has already been stated, as tuition fees and living costs have become more expensive for the average Greek family who used to send their kids to the UK for university degrees. But things have changed in other respects too. Other European countries have started offering degrees in English. The Netherlands, for instance, Denmark, Sweden, Central Europe, have started getting the attention of Greek students for both graduate and undergraduate degrees. The fact that English has become a universal language is on the one hand an asset for the UK, as it helps to attract students there from all over the world, but on the other it may hurt it, as English can be used by other parties to attract students to their own countries. Greek students also enroll at for-profit private colleges in Greece that collaborate with UK universities. These colleges are not accredited by the Greek state. They are not really fully, at least, recognized, as the constitution does not allow for private tertiary education, and they are somehow kept in the dark. We don't usually know, we don't usually see them, and we don't really know what kind of education these colleges provide in Greece, what the quality of the faculty is, and what the work conditions are there. The students who end up there are usually the ones who cannot pass the not so difficult entrance exams to the public universities, and those that do not have the financial means to study abroad. Now, what about British students in Greece? Practically, at least from what I could see, there aren't any. I just heard there are 20,000. I don't see them. I mean, I haven't come across them myself in the university. And perhaps with the exception of students affiliated with the British School of Athens. There used to be some Erasmus students who visited us, but now Britain has exited the Erasmus program. There has been a replacement scheme set up in Britain. We've heard about it, but I'm not sure if it is reciprocal. I mean, if it involves reciprocity, probably not from what I just heard. And in any case, we haven't seen students recently from Britain in our university, at least. We should admit that Greek universities are not very attractive to British students. We offer a very, very limited number of English courses, but we offer tutorials to visitors. Accommodation is difficult, and I will not refer here to the overall academic environment in Greece, which, contrary to expectations, may be appealing to some students who may visit us, if not for the revolution, at least for some activism. And I speak from experience about this. Okay. Of course, Greece is appealing for its history and its climate and has always attracted students and researchers, especially interested in archaeology or the Greek landscape and weather. I should mention here as an example the voyage of Robin Collingwood, the Oxford philosopher that I study and work on, who came to Greece with his students on a sailboat to Greece in 1939 to visit archaeological sites. And a book came out of this trip entitled The First Mate's Log. Things may change in the near future, since now Greek public universities can set up English undergraduate and graduate programs. The departments of classics and history and archaeology on the one hand, and the medical schools in both Athens and Thessaloniki have already successfully set up such undergraduate programs, and there are many more English-speaking master's programs. One may hope that Greek universities will initiate joint programs with their acclaimed British counterparts to offer not just degrees, but also particular summer schools and individual courses. Finally, let me suggest an area of collaboration that is close to my interest and specialty. I don't have to tell our British friends how important classics, ancient Greek philosophy and history have been in British tertiary education. Some of the best scholarship has come out of British universities. We now have in Greece a community of scholars, some of which have been educated in the UK, who are really first-rate and can enter in very fruitful collaborations in joint research projects in this area, which faces various challenges these days. A related area is theology, which is snubbed in Greece by serious academics for various reasons. Greece, however, has a trove of manuscripts in libraries and monasteries that can be studied not just for intellectual reasons, but also for very practical ones, as the understanding of the Orthodox tradition and its entanglement with politics is of such vital importance in current affairs in the eastern part of Europe. Thank you.
No, thank you, Vasu. And I think, sorry, just to clarify my opening remarks, I think about the 20,000 students, they're actually Greek students that are studying on UK programs here. I believe I was just trying to have a look through my notes. I think there's around about 150 UK students that have come here on mobility schemes. So we are very much at the lower end of that scale. But no, thanks for that. And I think some really interesting points there, particularly that paradox of English becoming a lingua franca of academia, that actually opens up opportunities that aren't in the UK. And so we need to sort of understand how to respond to that. But no, thank you. And if I can now invite Professor Sotiropoulos, I'm really sorry. Please.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me, and also the chairperson for guidance regarding the opening statements we now deliver to you. My first point is a more general one. It has to do with the fact that in the past, it seems to me, the possibilities of cooperation between the British tertiary education system and the Greek tertiary or higher education system were many more than today. Over time, it seems that the two education systems have drifted apart. Let me mention three aspects. One is that the British higher education system has become more interested towards results. It's a results-oriented system. By contrast, the Greek one has excessively become a system in which following the legal process is what matters most. Secondly, the Greek education system, the higher education system, remains very highly centralized, one of the most centralized education systems in Europe. By contrast, the British one has become decentralized. Finally, the Greek higher education system still remains tuition fees, while the fee structure in the British system, as we all know, has changed dramatically, and tuition fees have soared. In view of all this, is it possible to find points of contact between the two systems? Are there any possibilities for cooperation? There may be some. To start with, let me say, or actually remind you, that in this country there is a long-term divergence between the occupational specialties and skills demanded by the Greek labor market and the specialties and skills provided by Greece's higher education. This is a phenomenon that started probably a quarter of a century ago and still goes on. Greek policymakers can learn from their British counterparts on how to bridge or at least reduce this gap, and in fact, perhaps, given that there is a demand by Greek companies for specific specialties which the Greek universities cannot meet, perhaps the British universities can jump in. Until this gap is reduced, in Greece, the UK may provide incentives to Greek students to study subjects which are in demand in Greece. Examples are information and communication technology, tourism and hotel management, human resources management, engineering, biology, and health sciences. No incentives, of course, are needed for studies in medicine, law, or architecture. Now, trends in education cannot be solely demand-driven. UK universities can lead the way in providing education programs which are not currently in demand in Greece or elsewhere, but would prove that tertiary education occupies the driver's seat in society. These would be new programs. For example, interdisciplinary programs across the natural sciences, the social sciences, and humanities. These would be programs which would be focused on transferable skills rather than on single subject skills, which quickly become outdated. Now, the UK is the world's second most popular destination of internationally mobile students after the USA. However, in my view, it would be wrong for UK education planners to think that competition for international students comes from across the Atlantic. It comes from university systems across the English Channel. There are by now scores of English language, BA, MA, and doctoral programs in Western, Northern, and Central Europe, to which Greek and other university students are attracted. Now, which would be the target of such a reform of Greek and British universities in the future? The share of international students enrolled in tertiary education increases with the level of tertiary education. So, based on UK, OECD, and UNESCO data back from 2019, the latest we have, Greece is the only OECD country where the share of mobile students at the master's level is slightly lower than at the bachelor's level. On the other hand, there is a need for Greece to develop attractive master's and doctoral degree programs. This policy target, if adopted, can be achieved by drawing on the UK experience of graduate programs and cooperating with UK universities. The UK may boast that in addition to 11,000 Greeks who study in the UK, there are another 20,000 Greeks enrolled in private sector colleges in Greece who study UK programs. Unfortunately, in my view, this is at the level of the BA rather than the postgraduate programs which I underlined. Now, the number of Greeks studying in the UK programs and residing in Greece is double the number of Greeks who study and reside in the UK itself. It is doubtful that, except for some financial gain for some UK universities, this trend in the future may do any good to the reputation of UK tertiary education as a whole. My point is not to start an argument against private colleges in Greece. This is not my point. I just want to argue that without the problem of recognition, which my colleagues have mentioned, we would still be very doubtful about such private colleges. My problem has to do with the low status or lack of complete recognizability of such private colleges in Greece. Most of these colleges, after all, they are not respected either by the Greek community or by Greek employers. For UK universities, pursuing a strategy of penetrating the Greek market through such colleges will not be rewarding in the long run. Why risk the reputation of a UK university by bonding it to a makeshift private sector college in Greece? As I go through this presentation, let me mention a few more points, just 3. I would like to say that there is a risk for UK universities to assess these private sector colleges. An assessment, by which I mean external review, may become a problem for that kind of colleges. It will be much better if there is a strategy to build UK programs in Greece to switch to master's degrees and doctoral programs. There is a demand for such degrees in Greek universities, and we cannot meet this demand. Why? Because the Greek public university system is under-resourced in terms of infrastructure and libraries. So UK universities may want to target Greeks who already have a BA and would like to pursue studies at a higher level. After Brexit, for prospective Greek students, the unattractive aspects of applying to and enrolling in a UK university have multiplied. Except for the skyrocketing costs of tuition and housing fees, applicants and their families have to think of other impediments. And I would like to mention a few in case policymakers would like to take them into account. Compared to Dutch and other European universities, UK universities announce decisions on applications too late in the summer before the start of the academic year. That's my first point. Then, the process of applying and obtaining a student visa calls for excessive amounts of electronic paperwork and patience on the part of the applicant. That's my second point. And beyond the unreasonable cost of a student visa, running in the hundreds of euros, there are sudden additional bureaucratic and financial costs. Examples are a mystifying, to me, required registration as an incoming student when someone enters the UK at Heathrow Airport, and secondly, the requirement to pay the costs of student health, I think in full, before an incoming student sets foot on British soil. To end on a more optimistic note, let me say that I would like to suggest 2 concrete ideas for the future. One is, if possible, for the British Council and the FCO to reinstitute the Chevening scholarships, which existed back then when I was a student. Very useful scholarships. And the second point is to try to create partnerships, not so much between institutions, British universities and Greek universities, but to create a kind of twinning exercise between Greeks who already teach or do research in British universities, so they live in Britain, and Greek academics and researchers in this country. This is an American idea. The Institute of International Education in Washington, D.C. has practiced this. The idea is that you bring in a Greek who can help his or her counterparts by transferring experience, suggesting new teaching curricula, or cooperating on research programs. And you bring him or her for a short time, 15 to 28 days, to lower the cost of this exercise. After all, Greeks who live in Britain and teach or do research there usually have also a residence in Greece. The overall outcome, I think, would be much more useful than it may sound. It's not a petty thing. It's a wonderful idea in a short time, first of all, to show to Greek colleagues, us, who teach or do research here, that there is a wonderful pool of our Greek colleagues in the UK. And also, secondly, perhaps to attract some of these Greeks who reside in the UK to try to reverse the brain drain, which is a typical Greek phenomenon nowadays. Thank you.
No, thank you, Dimitri, for that robust challenge to the model of sort of TNE and partnerships, but also raising the issues that you've identified around how you embed things like employability and skills within public institutions, but also how we can develop partnerships between our universities as well in those kind of key strategic areas. I was looking at sort of both Janet and Kevin during that. I think we'd all welcome simplification of the UK visa and immigration processes as well. So I think you have our support there. But I'll now move on to Kevin Van Kouten, who's going to speak now.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and it's a great pleasure to be here and to talk to you today. So I'm Kevin Van Kouten from the British Council, and I'm going to be talking to you. Interesting, listening to the last two speakers, I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on UK partnerships in Greece and UK transnational education. I just wanted to start by saying that I've been working with colleagues in the British Council here in Greece, with Maria in particular, for at least a decade now. And in that time, the landscape for higher education partnerships has been at times difficult to navigate, and there have been challenges and obstacles. But I am quite optimistic for the future. I think we're at a point now where partnerships can potentially flourish, and I think there's room for growth in both UK universities working with the private sector and with the public sector. And for me, that would be what would be ideal. I think there is room for growth in both areas, and I'm going to talk a bit about that as I go through in my talk today. I just wanted to say at the beginning, though, that I think the UK transnational education and the status of the private colleges in Greece has been brought up by the previous two speakers. To my mind, this grey area that UK transnational education is in Greece is really related to the status of the local colleges. But I would argue it's not related to the quality or the curriculum that's delivered by the UK universities. And I think that's quite an important distinction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research we've done and the benefits that we find stem from transnational education programs and partnerships, both with public and private sector institutions in both Greece and elsewhere. So we commissioned a report a few years ago now on the state of UK higher education, transnational education partnerships in Greece. And we did this to build our efforts to support collaborations between Greek and UK higher education sectors in this area and improve the understanding of transnational education sector. The research provides valuable insights into student perspectives of TNE, preferred methods of delivery, policy considerations and potential opportunities. And there are some very positive messages. There's evidence that there's a clear window of opportunity, and I think this is really important, for an increase in transnational education in Greece, and areas for consideration. I think one of the key issues, which has already been mentioned, is related to recognition. And I think this research and in general, we really hope that recognition issues can be prioritised. And I know there were ongoing discussions about this in the sector, and I'm not going to go into details, and this is not the platform really for the details, but I think that it is being prioritised. And also, crucially, development of TNE collaborations and partnerships with Greek public universities. And as I said, I think there is room for growth in both areas. The report really provides a fascinating insight to TNE policy and practice. With 20,000 students, as has already been mentioned, studying in Greece on UK programmes, Greece has had a long-standing history of being the top host country for UK TNE in the EU. UK TNE programmes have been offered in Greece since the early 1990s, and currently about 75% of TNE students in Greece study at the undergraduate level. It's offered by local partners who operate at private colleges, as already been discussed, and the majority of the provision at the moment happens through franchise and validation arrangements. Most of the students are Greek as well. There are very few international students on these programmes. I think from the research and from our understanding of student perceptions of transnational education in Greece, one of the key things that students find is that, and also that one of the key, I think, key drivers for this is that in the private sector they have freedom to develop undergraduate and postgraduate programs in English. And Greece and the UK have a long-established collaboration in this area through partnering with the Greek Ministry of Education, and we are also, as has been mentioned, working on partnerships in the public sector. I think there is strong appetite from both sides to develop these partnerships in both sectors. But I think in the private sector in particular, the regulatory framework for professional recognition offered by colleges has developed and improved over the last 3 years, definitely. And although Brexit has created some difficulties, there is now a clearer path to professional recognition for students taking UK transnational education. There is increased student numbers year on year, and I think this demonstrates the appreciation of UK education and the strong position of UK T&E in Greece. I've also, I think it's important, we've talked to stakeholders. In particular, we did some research more recently with Greek higher education institutions to look at their perspectives on whether they saw potential for increased collaboration. And they expressed very positive perceptions about the quality and overall standing of UK higher education. But the majority of them, and I think that's been referenced already by our previous speakers, seem to be unclear about the full spectrum of T&E arrangements in Greece that are currently operating. But the evidence that we got from this research suggests that there's a clear correlation between the existence of an operational internationalisation strategy and a positive perception of demand for T&E within Greek higher education institutions. For Greek higher education institutions, they express their willingness to engage in T&E activities, and the real core, or the two key aspects that they considered to be important in establishing collaborations were to enable them to attract international students and to acquire and develop capacity in internationalisation. So I think those, as I say, those are the key drivers coming from the Greek higher education institutions who we surveyed for some of our research. But there are limitations, as has been set out already by a couple of speakers, some of these, but there are obstacles really around capacity to accommodate additional students, restrictions on the fee structure, restrictions on the development of programs in English, but that is changing, as we've heard. So I think there's willingness and some optimism in the sector, but I think there are still some challenges. But I think that, as I say, I'm optimistic for the future based on where we are today compared to a few years ago. So I just wanted to give you some reflections on the value of transnational education from some Greek stakeholders. We've just released, well, about to release a brand new piece of work looking at the value of transnational education to stakeholders in various countries around the world, and we included Greece in this survey. And the interviews that we had with Greek students reveal quite interesting findings about the value they place on T&E partnerships. The students see T&E as an alternative route to higher education. The route is particularly attractive to students from disadvantaged economic and social backgrounds, for students who can't afford the high financial costs of private tuition, and particularly the price of study in the UK is obviously quite high now, so transnational education is an option, or a positive option for students who potentially can't afford to travel to the UK to study. I think another interesting point is that a large proportion of these students are mature students, female students with family and other commitments who would otherwise have been able to study higher education programs. So there's definitely a widening participation agenda going on here with students from different backgrounds who are able to access international education through transnational education. And I think some interesting perceptions from the students around what they perceive as being the differences between a transnational education programme offered by the UK and a local Greek programme. One of the key ones is they thought it would be, having visiting speakers from the UK. They particularly like the fact that the emphasis is on employability and skills development, and found that to be a very strong driver for why they chose transnational education programmes. For the private sector institutions that are involved in T&E, they found that the partnering with a UK university allows their internal quality assurance mechanisms to be assessed, and they're learning best practice around how to quality assure their programs. And the majority of the stakeholders we spoke to felt that graduates of UK T&E programs in Greece have very strong employability prospects. Obviously, recognition issues aside, they felt that they had the skills they needed to move to the profession that they were interested in working in. The standards and academic delivery were praised, and this improved employability is attributed by the interviews to the emphasis that UK higher education places on experiential learning, internship opportunities, and continued professional development. I think the main driver for local partners choosing UK universities to partner with is that more than 90% of T&E programs offered in Greece are in collaboration with UK universities. I think there are also issues here around sustainability. So many partners cited multiple examples of how teaching and research in T&E partnerships contributed to building greater sustainability and resilience in their institutions. So just to summarise, I think that in Greece, T&E emerged and grew quite organically with very little involvement from the government. It has always been in this grey area. However, in 2020, the Greek government has engaged with the British Council in a strategic initiative, which has already been mentioned, to increase partnerships in the public sector. And all UK T&E is provided in Greece through local private colleges currently. And these institutions do not have degree awarding powers. So we are aware that there are still some issues, but I think things are improving. So finally, I'd just like to say there's a growing number of students who study with the UK but not in the UK, in Greece and elsewhere. And I think now is the time to further these existing partnerships and develop new ones to ensure students continue to have access to international opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, sort of panel members, for sort of really kind of thoughtful and provocative comments there. I wonder if there's a couple of areas that I'd like to explore before we open out to the floor for questions. And I wonder if we can start with this question around the existing transnational education partnerships, but also reflecting on Dimitri's comments that can we work better and foster collaborations between the public universities and UK institutions, particularly in areas where there is a specific need in terms of new programs. So Dimitri, do you have any reflections on how we can actually do that? The growth has been in private colleges, so how can we get sort of the public universities and UK institutions working closer in those kind of higher level programs? And are there any kind of recommendations for policymakers about how we can do that?
Thank you for the question. One possibility would be that British universities offer either tuition fee reduction on particular specialties, for example, specialties related to tourism and hotel management, compared to tuition fees paid by Greek students when they apply for other specialties. Another opportunity would be for British universities to invite, for instance, in the same area, in hotel and management and tourism, experienced Greek entrepreneurs or CEOs of tourist businesses who could transfer to students in these very same fields their experience from the booming tourist sector in Greece. And possibly also it would be interesting to see if British universities could supply Greek universities who have such programs, they exist in Greece, with expertise on how to renew curricula, how to, above all, link internships in particular sectors, for example, in ICT companies, with studies in computer science. These are ideas I would suggest may be interesting.
No, thank you. And Janet, I was wondering if I could maybe turn to you as well, as the Vice-Chancellor of a research-intensive institution. the University of Liverpool, but that has really embraced widening participation, working with local economic priorities. How do you see those kind of the partnerships that we might be able to develop could support those the priorities identified by Dimitri?
Yeah, we do an immense amount of work in the Liverpool City region with communities where not enough of the population come into higher education. For instance, we set up a special centre in Anfield where only 14% of young people attend universities. That's so far below the national average as to be pretty much a disgrace. So we've set up a centre there, and I think something like 80% of the young people we've been working with have entered higher education. So that's a really successful program. But we spend a lot on scholarships, we spend a lot on outreach. We have a Liverpool Scholars program. Now that's all working with local students. In terms of widening participation globally, that was, I think, the stimulus for Liverpool Online. It's about providing, a research-intensive university's postgraduate qualification, wholly online, delivered to your home, so to speak. You don't have to disrupt your family, you don't have to disrupt your paid employment. You can study, when you like. Typically, our remote students, our online students, study for between 16 and 20 hours a week. And, I think it's probably outdoes many of our face-to-face students in terms of how many hours they actually spend in the classroom. But I also know from talking to those students that they have a huge commitment to their cohort. They work in virtual classrooms that draw from students all over the world. They feel a huge sense of connectedness through the mode of delivery, and I do feel that it's a very important part of widening participation. And this is not just students overseas, this is students in the UK as well who are studying remotely for postgraduate qualifications, and those qualifications are almost entirely about professional development. They are almost entirely about upskilling. They're about cutting-edge programs, particularly now in areas like, as I said, artificial intelligence, data analytics, healthcare, leadership. So we are targeting areas where people most desperately need to bring added value through the kind of skills and intellectual development that they can get through these programs. So widening participation doesn't stop at getting them in at 18. It certainly means that we have to pay attention to giving our students social and cultural capital that will take them into the workplace, but also attracting, as I've said, postgraduates.
No, thank you. And I think that link between the experience and the employability skills as well, and preparing people for the world of work, I think that was mentioned by a couple of the speakers. And Kevin, I was just wondering, you touched on this in your presentation, but what does your research and the evidence say around the TNE partnerships and how they do prepare people for work? Any kind of further insights from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that students, the main motivation for students who are taking a TNE program globally is the skills for employability. They're looking for programs that deliver those skills. And sometimes, so it's a very specific subset of students in many cases. And I think TNE has become a first choice in some cases for those types of students. They see TNE as providing that career pathway that they're looking for, which they maybe don't see in the public sector. That's not necessarily just about Greece. This is a more general global comment. So it's students who are very focused, who want a globally recognised degree that gives them those skills, and they often see TNE as a way to get those skills. And they talk about the analytical skills, the links to employers, internships that are offered, and different ways of teaching and learning compared to domestic provision, whichever country they're in. And I think that that is a driver. And I think 10 years ago, TNE in general was not necessarily seen as high quality, or it was seen as a second choice. But I think over the last 10, 20 years, it's established itself as being a viable alternative for many students, particularly, as I say, those types of students who are very employability focused.
No, thank you. And Vaso, I think you mentioned as well this the resistance within the public institutions here in Greece to standardisation of the programmes, the Bologna process. But given the importance of being able to embed employability and professional competencies, are there opportunities there for partnerships between UK and Greek institutions to help embed those things in a way that works with the grain of institutions rather than is seen as something that's trying to supplant them?
Yeah, definitely. There are some collaborations already, but they are based on initiatives that individuals take. And so we really need, I think, programs that perhaps between institutions or between the two countries to fund mutual research, for instance, and in areas where we cannot find funding from the market. And that would improve also the academic environment in Greece, in my view, and to have, for instance, exchanges between faculty and have foreign faculty teaching Greece on a regular basis. And so I don't agree so much with Dimitri, who restricted somehow his comments on Greeks in the UK. I don't prefer to just limit ourselves. This happens quite a lot. I mean, we just consider Greeks abroad. We need to have an international faculty visit and have our students exposed to other nationalities, let's say. Yeah.
No, thank you. And so it's that kind of sharing experience and good practice and looking at ways to foster that. And actually, I think that takes me to the second thing I wanted to raise. And I think for different reasons, I think it was touched on that through the pandemic, we obviously had to explore kind of new and digital ways of working because mobility wasn't possible. But also since the UK has left the EU, mobility and exchange is a little bit more expensive and can be a little bit more challenging. So are there kind of digital solutions to some of these problems? Are there kind of new pedagogies or new approaches that we could take to kind of foster those relationships that aren't just sending faculty over or on exchanges?
Yeah, right. We already have seminars with colleagues abroad. We invite speakers more easily to give lectures here. There have been some programs in digital humanities, for instance. And in the future, in my view, I don't have real data, but my hunch is that, I mean, mass education will go online for the most part, and the on-campus education will be limited to some elite somehow. That's my impression. But definitely there is more room to improve ties through digital solutions, yeah.
No, thank you. And Janet, you mentioned the work of Liverpool Online. If there was sort of one lesson from that and the success of that, what is it that's made it sort of really take hold and grow?
It's a mature experience. I mean, and these are students who already have an undergraduate degree for which they probably travelled. Okay, so I would always say that our young people need face-to-face. When applications to Oxford and Cambridge dry up, that's the day I'll believe that face-to-face is going out of fashion. Because I think the experience that you get from bouncing your ideas off other students, from talking, you know, in a discursive environment, you know, the lab, you know, if you're in a science subject, or the workshop, or the simulator, or, you know, or the ward, or the, you know, the small animal hospital, wherever it is you're having that educative experience, I think that the face-to-face is an absolutely vital part. I think the success of Liverpool Online is about the target audience, that mature, experienced postgraduate constituency that really want to change. They either want to change their lives, they want to go in another direction, or they want to upskill significantly. And they've done that. They've done that piece of their development, you know, earlier in their educational career. So I think that is the success. We haven't gone into undergraduate online provision. I think, again, that is most successful where it's targeting a mature market.
No, thank you. And Dimitri, given, as you were saying, around looking at opportunities for students from Greece to study in the UK, Do you think that an online or blended approaches that were delivered here in Greece could also be a suitable alternative to address those kind of skill needs?
This is the second week of classes in Greek universities after 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic conditions under which we were restricted in teaching in classrooms. And I must tell you that the last few days I had problems entering the amphitheaters at the law school of the University of Athens. People are back. They want to be there in person. There is nothing that can replace, as you all know, classroom teaching. I have benefited from online teaching. It was less burdensome. But on the other hand, perhaps, on some respects, on the other hand, on some respects it was less burdensome, on other respects it was tiring for both sides, students and professors. So I think the best way would be to regard online teaching as necessary, but to an extent complementary to teaching in classrooms, because of the education and communication aspect of being in front of the people whom you want to teach and them listening to you in person. And on the other hand, I think, as you mentioned, part of the educational experience is, if we talk about studying in Britain, to travel abroad and reside in a foreign country. This is also lost with online education. So I guess from a personal point of view, if I am paid, as I am, the same amount of money to teach online. But if I want to be a true teacher, no, I should be in the classroom.
No, thank you for that. And Kevin, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of the opportunities for sort of online distance learning around TNE partnerships?
Yeah, well, I think just a comment really. My impression, or some of the people we've spoken to in the sector, felt that the COVID pandemic actually strengthened some of their international partnerships because they were having more meetings, they were having more regular contact. It became much easier to work with partners on the other side of the world, and for many institutions it really strengthened those partnerships. So in some senses that move to almost sort of managing the partnerships or collaborating virtually has really strengthened their international partnerships of the sector. So I think from that perspective there was a benefit.
No, absolutely. I think we were having this conversation over lunch that we learned that there was so much we could do online that we absolutely thought could only be done in person. Yeah. But then you identify the things that absolutely can only be done in person as well, and where that value is added. I just had one other area that I wanted to touch on before we sort of go to the floor for questions, and that was actually around research and innovation and collaborations there. Vaso, you spoke about the opportunities and resources that we might be able to make more of. Where do you see those kind of opportunity areas for collaboration between the UK and Greece?
Yeah, I can speak only about the humanities because I don't really know the field in other areas. So in the humanities, Greece can offer unique opportunities given the archaeological sites, given, as I said, theology, which is not at all considered a serious topic in Greece, unnaturally, but also history, both, ancient, but also contemporary history, the relations of Greece in the Balkans and in the area around here. These are important for international relations, for policy, and there have been, as I said, collaborations. You mentioned chairs in the UK that are devoted to Greek studies, both modern and Byzantine and others. But what I wanted to stress is that now we have a community of scholars in Greece which are really first-rate, as I mentioned, and they really can contribute to great scholarship together with their colleagues. And I wanted, I thought I'd say it at the end, but I think, the British Council in Athens should try to make more visible the amazing results we have and work done in British universities in the humanities, because the public sphere in Greece is still dominated by the culture and scholarship in continental Europe. And although, we know the language better. I mean, English is so much more widespread. Still, I mean, it's not prominent, the British outcome in the universities, in the humanities, in the public sphere in Greece. And that's something that has to be redressed, I think.
No, thank you. And I think that's a really important point that I'm sure colleagues from the British Council are noting down. And Dimitri, I think you're the one person on the panel that has lived and studied in both and worked in the UK and Greece. What do you see as this kind of the really important factors for kind of fostering collaboration between our two countries?
I think the Greek universities can benefit on many fronts from the British university's experience. I should start with what most people, including myself, consider the most big problem in Greek universities. There is no real external review. External assessment exercises are decorative. They have been legislated and they take place every few years, but there is a very long British experience on how to assess professors, how to assess research teams, how to evaluate whole departments. I hope that this knowledge is transferable, and I hope that we in Greece obtain information and training on how to do a real external assessment rather than one that simply ticks boxes and finally, usually, comes up with the result of perfect or almost perfect research center or department. And another front on which we could work together would be the enrichment of the curricula of various subjects taught in Greek universities along the lines I implied earlier when I talked, namely an effort to imitate Germans and Americans in pushing for interdisciplinary studies. There are very few, if any, interdisciplinary research centers in this country, and I believe very few departments also in universities. There is such experience in Britain, and I hope that could be an area in which Greek universities can benefit from the experience of our British colleagues. Let me limit it to these two big ideas.
No, that's great. Thank you. And before we go to Thor, Janet, any sort of other sort of comments or reflections on research collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on that last comment, I mean, some of the most exciting work, I think, in British academia, because it's right across the discipline spread, is in the interstices between disciplines. So between the engineers and the bioscientists, you know, it's not just enough to know about the operation of the heart. You need an engineer to give you the thing to monitor it, or computer scientist, or so. Very few disciplines can afford to operate in isolation, I think. And maybe our learned societies, not our research councils, because our research councils, who are the funders, as you know, and it's very much predicated on peer review, which is incredibly, you know, labour intensive, but that's the way in which we assess, as you know, in the UK, through our research excellence framework, but also, you know, the ongoing process of bidding for funds, some of which are responsive and some of which are, you know, free for individual researchers to apply to. I think that the research councils have been quite good at adapting to the interdisciplinary imperatives of the, you know, the biggest challenges that face us as a world. That you can't talk about vaccine development just by the people who develop the vaccines. You have to have, you know, the social scientists to tell you about people's behaviour as regards the way in which vaccines are received in the population, you know, rationally or non-rationally. But the learned societies, I think, are still work in progress as regards, they have a notion of history, they have a notion of philosophy, they have a notion of, you know, the discipline as a pure thing, which is quite difficult for scholars who straddle disciplines to, you know, to find themselves, you know, in the conversation when sometimes they do need to be in the conversation with that fresh thinking. But interdisciplinarity is so much a part of every development in society that the academy really does need to catch up, I think.
No, thank you, Janet, and thank you, panel, for what's been a fascinating discussion. So I suggest we now open up to the floor for any questions. We've got about kind of 15 minutes or so. I think, as we all know, this is a room of academics and policymakers, and people do like standing up and making statements rather than questions. So if we can really ask questions of the panel to make the most of the kind of 15 minutes that we have. So please.
Thank you. Permit me a 30-second observation before I ask my two questions.
I think
no,
you're
because
excused.
actually I think for an audience of academics, business people, policymakers, there's, for my mind, a huge underlying significance to what you've been discussing so fruitfully for this last hour, which is the longer-term impacts of seeing a steady decline. Because in the business of people, in the business of relations and understanding, we should never underestimate the effect, the positive effect of people studying, whether at undergraduate, postgraduate level, and what that means for their connection between countries. So that, to my mind, is the prize at stake and in jeopardy here. Two questions picking up on Professor Sotiropoulos' comments particularly, but others. What are the biggest, or what is the biggest obstacle, do you think, to the cooperation that we're aspiring to rekindle and re-energize? Is it economic? Is it cultural? Or dare I say, is it political? And a slightly leading second question, what prospects do you see of reform and liberalization in the higher education sector here in Greece, given the constitutional block that Professor Kindi refers to? Thank you.
No, thank you. Dimitri, would you like to respond?
Okay, thank you very much. Could I start with the last question? I think the situation regarding recognition of private college degrees has improved over time, and this is because of, as you know, legislation that comes not from Athens but from Brussels. There is now a possibility to recognize that degrees from private sector colleges offer professional, not educational credentials on a par with the academic degrees offered by Greek public or other European universities. This is not so well known, but it's true that that is a possibility allowed by the European Union legislation. So if you are a mechanical engineer who has graduated from a private sector college, then in terms of your professional opportunities, you are treated, I hope the same, as a mechanical engineer who has a BA degree in mechanical engineering from a public university in Greece. Of course, one should take into account the sometimes reluctant stance of the professional bodies in each of these subjects. For example, Bar Association of Athens regarding the practicing of law, and associations of engineers in Greece, and so on and so forth. To go to the next step, to have further recognition, I think there is little that the UK can do. The solution will come again from Brussels, namely, in the future, I suppose that given the demand for higher education all over Europe, which is not going to subside, there may be pressure for new European legislation that upon completing a review assessment, an external peer review of private sector colleges, that is vital. Such selected and approved private sector colleges may be treated equally with public universities. I stressed twice that there is a need for some kind of control over the quality of education offered by, the Greek programs in such private sector colleges. There is also a need to check labor relations in these colleges. It's a very dark labor market there regarding young PhDs who work in private sector colleges in Greece. And also there's a need to look at infrastructure of such private sector colleges before we arrive at further recognition of private sector college degrees. Regarding The first question, which has to do with cooperation of Greek and British universities. In my mind, again, a possibility would be to be very selective. I know we all try to throw in ideas that seem wonderful, but the matter of calculating costs is a very important matter. For Greek families, as you know, for many Greek families, studying or even traveling to the UK can be an expensive exercise. So a selective approach would be one in which British universities would pick, as it's already happening, I presume, talented Greek students and offering them a possibility to study in British universities. So to go the other way around, instead of receiving applications from Greek students who may or may not afford to study in the UK, have British authorities, the British Council, for example, find who are talented graduating students from Greek high schools, and perhaps give them some incentives to go to study in Britain. That would be another possibility. I could talk in length, but there are other people on the panel.
No, thank you. And Vasily, did you want to answer?
I mean, regarding the first question, I think the short answer is that the obstacle is basically economic, in my view, because students nowadays are more cosmopolitan. They know the language. They definitely prefer to go to Britain. We know this when they ask us for recommendation letter or advice, etc. So they would love to go, but they don't have the money. I mean, so that would be the obstacle. Now, regarding reform, as regards the Constitution, I don't see any prospect in the foreseeable future for constitutional reasons, first of all. The climate has changed in favor, I think, of the reform. Now, we had recently a new law for the universities, supposedly to reform the Greek universities, the public ones. And in this law, it was made possible now to have these undergraduate international programs and graduate programs. That's an improvement, but there is great resistance, in my view, in Greek universities to really reform them. Okay, these are just window dressing reforms, in my view, in many respects. And so I'm not that optimistic. And that's why I think that we should have other bodies forcing collaborations between faculty and institutions.
No, thank you. I think we've got two questions over here as well. I think the person behind you first, and then... Thank you. And then you.
Thank you. Question to you three. Given that, I mean, if we accept the fact that the quality of tertiary education really depends also on research and on teaching hours, is there any move? I mean, currently quality assurance doesn't look at that for degrees. Is there any move towards ensuring the quality of degrees abroad? Because we were talking about earlier about the for-profit companies in Greece that are doing this. Is there any move for such a thing? So that's question number one. And second, given the dramatic increase in fees, which are getting closer and closer to the American standards than other European standards, do you think that this might actually create some opportunities for the collaboration with Greece? I.e. sending students abroad for a semester, which might be cheaper for some British universities than otherwise, or outsourcing part of the teaching to Greek colleagues who are here, and doing part of the degrees remotely or in place in Greece. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think maybe I'll start on the quality assurance question and then maybe ask Kevin to come in. So there's been a lot of work that's going on in the UK at the moment around the quality assurance of transnational education. The Office for Students has a consultation that's out at the moment and is looking at the data that we currently collect around transnational education, trying to make that a little bit more as close as possible as the data we collect for domestic programs as well. It is quite difficult, particularly with outcomes, but it is definitely where they're sort of moving. But also the Quality Assurance Agency does have a program for where institutions can effectively sort of sign up to have their programs looked at and reviewed through that process as well. But Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, I mean, the fundamental point is, as I'm sure you're aware, the quality of any programme delivered by a UK university, the responsibility lies with the university itself, wherever it's delivered. So we have that, we've always had that structure, and then we have additional quality assurance, which has come from the QAA and in future will come through the Office for Students. I don't see any move to change that. That's the that's the reality.
No, thank you. And on the second point, Janet, any sort of comments or reflections?
I think outsourcing teaching to Greek colleagues would go down like a lump of lead with my British colleagues. As for mobility, I would love more British students to come here to study, but the simple fact of the matter is that we are not good at foreign languages. We are not good at developing our young people to aspire to multilingual capacity, and therefore, their choices are absolutely determined by where they can be taught in English. Sad to say, that's not true of 100% of them. Of course, it's not true of 100% of them. There are students who simply, who go and want to learn and all the rest of it. But if there were more programs taught in English, you would have more students here, because we are supporting outward mobility. As I said earlier, we are not supporting inward mobility because that's the way the government has set up the scheme. I personally do not think we fought hard enough to stay in Erasmus, because the big beasts were in there talking about science and they were talking about Horizon, and so we are still potentially, though not necessarily, going to be in the collaborative space for research. But in my view, the way in which most of our friends and neighbours in Europe would have experienced any kind of higher education would have been through their child, their neighbour's child, their niece, their nephew, whoever, studying for a semester or a year in the UK through Erasmus, and also the third country participation that Erasmus opened up, the mutual collaboration, the programs that we were able to build together, the capacity building, all those things, we let them go too easily, but that, sadly, is in the past now. But in terms of British students, I'm afraid, they are attracted to programs that are taught in English.
No, thank you. And I think probably our final question here, although I think one hand just went up there as well. I think one more as well, Rebecca at the back.
Thank you. Two business questions, one for the British contingent on the panel and the other for the Greek. Why there are no why UK universities don't try to set up campuses outside the UK? The business schools have done it. When I was at the Global Advisory Board of the London Business School, we took the decision to make Dubai a campus, and SAD followed, and Columbia. Other universities, they're not doing. You can serve a whole area with a campus somewhere else. That's my first question. The second, for the Greek contingent, is that the Greek universities are quite good in honing the technical skills, the technical, not in engineering terms, law, whatever. They're pretty good. But then the application skills, getting yourself starting in life, we're not quite good. On the contrary, UK universities, they appear to be better, let's put it this way. Is there a way of joining forces, providing joint curricula, technical here in Greece and more application skills in the UK, and giving a joint degree if that's possible?
No, thank you. Well, as the Vice-Chancellor at a university with a branch campus, would you like to go first?
Okay, so not a branch campus, Jamie,
Sorry.
It's a joint venture university. It has two parents, University of Liverpool and Shanzhou Tong University in China. and it is an independent university, but it gives University of Liverpool degrees as well as Shanzhou Tong Liverpool University degrees. It's autonomous, it hires its own staff. It does, however, live in our regulatory and our curriculum environment. That's the relationship that we have. But also students, about 50% pre-pandemic, the numbers, about 50% of those students choose to study for the second 2 years of their 4-year program. This is a program taught in China and obviously in Liverpool as well, wholly in English. All right, that's the distinctive part of it. And they have just opened a new campus which is focusing on vocational education in Taichung. Now, the students who come to Liverpool, the 50% of XJTLU students, 90% of them go into postgraduate study in top 100 institutions all over the world. So that wholly in English degree, which is, started in China, finished in Liverpool, is seen as a gateway to elite institutions all over the world. So, that's one of the reasons why students choose that option. It is a unique campus, that joint venture campus, which is, allied to its parents but is autonomous. Nottingham Ningbo is the University of Nottingham in Ningbo in China. Now, both those institutions were set up around the beginning of this century. The Chinese law would no longer permit their establishment. All right, the law has changed since then. Would we do it now? I doubt it. So, conditions change. And when you get into bed with somebody, you have to be prepared to, to put up with their snoring, right? Or, if their sleep habits change, or if, you get a divorce and somebody else comes in. Because in a previous institution, we had a major partnership in Malaysia with a private institution. The ownership changed, the values changed. It's not a certain business, and you cannot guarantee continuity. You have to be taking a risk. You do the best you can. Most of us go into this for, I would always prefer that it washes its face and makes a little bit of profit. That would be great. But most of it is about capacity building. Most of it is about partnership. Most of it is about reciprocation. It's not about, sucking out the intellectual capital from that nation. It's not about encouraging brain drain. It's about partnership. And so I think there are so many risks attached to branch campuses that the way in which TNE operates here, for instance, in partnership, is very much the safest way. And if you can find a values framework in which you can coexist, then I think that is the ideal thing. And we are likely, you're right, to find that with European partners in a way that in other parts of the world it's less certain. But there are generally reasons why it's not looked upon favourably in that nation that we should develop. Obviously all of us, when we came out of the European Union, looked for ways to get round the rules so we could stay in, really. So Liverpool being Liverpool, we talked to a lot of potential Irish partners about how we could operate in Ireland and therefore still in the EU. But Brussels got there before us, and there are all kinds of reasons why we can't still take advantage of what membership would bring us. So we get approaches all the time, especially I would say from the Middle East. Maybe 2 a week come into me. Can you build a campus here? Can you work in partnership there? Not to me. If anybody wants to do that, then you've got 3 months left before I leave Liverpool.
No, that's great.
Just very quickly to throw in there are UK branch campuses in Malta and I think in Cyprus. So it depends on the local environment and the legislation and the attractiveness. But I know that a lot of Greek students go to Cyprus to take programs because of the recognition. So it's very complex where universities set up.
Yeah. And I think I'm being asked to draw this to a close, but I think so. The final word, I think, will be Maria from the British Council. Oh, yeah, sorry.
The Greeks, the question about the Greeks. That's a very good suggestion about the joint programs, but they will not benefit the Greek students. You know why? Because these are the absurdities of the constitution and this problem, because the Greeks are not allowed to enroll in programs that are taught in English on the undergraduate level. So, no, of course it's true, because they are not supposed to pay fees, the Greeks. And if they enroll in the international programs, they have to pay fees, because the other students will pay fees, I mean the Chinese or the Indians, etc. And so they cannot enroll there, and so they cannot benefit from these programs which now have been made possible. And I mean, to exaggerate, I would say the Greek educational system is not focused on the students, it's focused on the faculty, and in my view, some of the faculty.
No. Thank you. And I think the final word, Maria.
No, it's not a final word, but I feel that because we don't have representatives from UK institutions that have collaborations with colleges in Greece, I feel that we need to kind of clarify some misconceptions that I have personally heard today. First of all, we've been talking about programs that are offered by colleges, but we need to remember that the UK institution that is in partnership with the college is very engaged in the process, in the learning process. It's when we're criticizing, in a way, the programs delivered by these colleges, essentially we're kind of criticizing the programs that are delivered by UK institutions. So I just wanted to say that. Also, all the international programs that colleges offer, they are submitted to the Ministry of Education and they get an approval. So there's that. In addition to that, of course, there's also a whole, if you like, examination process of facilities, but there I will leave an open, we'll open a parenthesis because there are questions even from the providers around the standards in relation to facilities. Kevin mentioned Quality Assurance Agency. The programs are quality assured and are quality assured several times. And they're not only quality assured by QAA, they're also quality assured by other accreditation bodies. So I think that even the Greek side has a lot to learn about the quality assurance. You've mentioned also that, the benefits about, the quality assurance systems in the UK. So here, there's an ecosystem that has a lot from the UK ecosystem, from the UK quality of education. So I just wanted to say this because there's no representative, and I felt that it's a bit unfair to be criticizing, and this is my second symposium, and it's exactly the same things I've heard in the previous time. So we are, in a way, we are moving forward. Private education in Greece, and the majority of this comes from the UK, is a good opportunity because it attracts international students. There are colleges that are affiliated faculties of UK universities. This says something. There are associate colleges. There are cases of colleges in the north of UK institutions. I don't want to use the word college because all the attention is a college, and we disregard the existence of the UK institution. They're attracting international students. There are good examples of how these colleges, these programs, these UK institutions attract international students and help Greece's growth, if you like, in internationalization. I just wanted to say that, not as an advocate, but I think that it's an honest account here of what's happening in Greece, and I think we should be giving this information. And one last point about the very ambitious program, aiming to forge collaboration between universities. I'm not able to share the report. It has just come out report. I mean, we're doing a survey between Greek institutions and Greek universities and UK universities participating in the program. And I have to say that it looks very, very promising. We heard Janet already saying the very mature collaboration that you're discussing with Aristotle University. And I have to say there are many more there. So I think this is a very positive message of what, the bilateral cooperation in education really means and represents in Greece. Thank you.
No. Thank you for that, and I think that's an excellent point to end now. I think we're now in the way of coffee and networking, so please, would you join us in thanking our panel for their fantastic contributions.
Thank you for this most interesting panel and the moderation. More efficient and effective system is at the very bottom of the agenda. The only thing you all mentioned were constraints, difficulties. It was all cultural problems with you. It was real constraints. Back to the classroom in half an hour. Thank you.